Hey again, hello and welcome. My name is Brenda Mahishi, and I am a data project manager for the Child and Family Data Archive, also known as CF Data. Thank you for joining us today for our data release webinar on accessing and using the Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey, or FACES, 2014 Contextual Variables data file. I'm joined today by my colleagues from Mathematica, Andrew Wen and John Chaika. Before I turn the presentation over to them, I will briefly introduce you to CF Data and let you know a little bit more about the structure of this webinar. This webinar is hosted by CF Data, which is where you go to access the FACES data. CF Data is supported by a contract from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, or OPRE, and housed at ICPSR within the University of Michigan. It is the place to discover, access, and analyze data on early care, education, and families. Users are able to access over 350 data sets with the ability to analyze select data sets online. Users can also search and compare variables and peruse data-related publications. And of course, user support is also available to assist you in finding and obtaining data. I will go into a little bit more detail about the archive later in the webinar. For today's webinar, Andrew and John will provide you with an overview of the FACES 2014 study and the contextual variables data file, as well as the disclosure risk, and then provide information on data user resources. Following those sections, I will give an overview of CF Data and the resources that we have to support researchers. Importantly, I will focus on how users can request access to the FACES 2014 contextual variables data file through the CF Data website. And then finally, we'll close this webinar with a brief question and answer session. I am now happy to pass the presentation over to Andrew so he can share more about the FACES data.
Thanks, Brenda. Before introducing the new data file, I wanted to first give an overview of the main FACES 2014 study. So for over 50 years, Head Start has provided child development and family support services. Since it started in 1965, Head Start has served over 30 million children and families who are economically disadvantaged, supporting children and families through educational, nutritional, social, emotional, and family support services, as well as cultural and language experiences. The Head Start Family and Child Experiences Survey, referred to as FACES, is a series of nationally representative studies of Head Start. The study describes the population that Head Start serves, staff qualifications, credentials, and opinions, Head Start classroom practices and qualities, and indicators related to children and families. There have been 7 successive rounds of FACES studies, and today's webinar will be about a new data file produced for the 2014 round of the FACES study. Before showcasing the new FACES 2014 contextual variables data file, I want to first give an overview of the main FACES 2014 study. The study consists of a core set of data collection activities to capture key characteristics and indicators related to Head Start programs, classrooms, and children. These activities are referred to as the core study files. Additionally, FACES 2014 included special studies known as the PLUS studies, one of which is the Family Engagement Plus study, which provides information about the engagement and service provision experiences of Head Start families. All FACES data across all study files are de-identified, with all personal and geographic identifiers removed to protect the privacy of participants and programs. However, over the years, users have often requested geographic data in order to better understand the socioeconomic or neighborhood context of Head Start centers. These requests motivated the creation of the new FACES 2014 contextual variables data file, which provides community-level data with very limited risk of identification of specific FACES participants, programs, and centers. In this next section, I will give an overview of the new contextual variables data file. But before I do, I want to stress that limiting the risk of disclosure was our highest priority when creating this data file. Due to the sensitive nature of this data, the FACES 2014 contextual variables data file can only be accessed through CF Data's Virtual Data Enclave, or VDE. We'll give you a more detailed description of our disclosure risk analysis, as well as how to access the data later in the webinar. First, let's begin with the data file structure and conventions. The FACES 2014 contextual variables data file is a single data file and is not designed to be used by itself. Instead, it needs to be merged with one of the other FACES 2014 core or family engagement plus study files. The data file contains the variable C2_ID, the common Head Start Center identifier across all FACES 2014 data files, and 28 contextual variables. These contextual variables are at the census block group or census tract level. They include 3 index variables that measure socioeconomic factors relevant to issues including health equity, the rural-urban commuting area code, and 24 demographic and socioeconomic variables. All contextual variables begin with the prefix CON_. And no geographic identifiers, such as the census tract codes or Head Start Center addresses, are provided in this data file. Here, you can see an overview of the available data and sources in the FACES 2014 contextual variables data file. The first 3 are the index variables, and they include the 2015 Area Deprivation Index, the 2015 Social Deprivation Index, and the 2015 Child Opportunity Index. These index variables were constructed from a variety of indicators measured for small geographic areas. For example, the 2015 Area Deprivation Index was constructed by the Center for Health Disparities Research from 17 indicators included in the 2011 to 2015 American Communities Survey 5-year sample, and it measures socioeconomic disadvantage on a scale from 1 to 100. The data file also contains the 2010 rural-urban commuting code, which is used to classify census tracts by population density and urbanization level. Finally, we included 24 demographic and socioeconomic variables derived from 2011 to 2015 American Community Survey. All contextual variables are at the census tract level, except for the 2015 Area Deprivation Index, which is at the census block group level. A more detailed description of these variables can be found in the user's manual for this data file. Before moving on, it's also important to note that the contextual variables in this file have been recoded from their original sources into categorical variables to limit the risk of disclosure. This recoding process is explained later in this webinar in the section on disclosure risk analysis. As I mentioned before, the FACES 2014 contextual variables data file is designed to be merged with other FACES 2014 data files. It can be merged directly with all core study files using the C2_ID center identifier variable. In order to merge the contextual variables with the Spring 2015 Family Engagement Parent file and the semi-structured Family Engagement Parent transcripts, you'll need to first merge these data files to the Fall 2014 to Spring 2015 child level data using the child ID variable, and then merge that file to the contextual variables through C2_ID. The contextual variables data file cannot be merged to the Spring 2015 Family Engagement Family Services staff file or the semi-structured Family Engagement Family Services staff transcripts, because these files are at the program level and not the center level. Users of the contextual variables data file will need to be very familiar with the main FACES 2014 study, which can be used to describe Head Start populations or explore associations between key indicators. Now, with the contextual variables data file, users can bring community-level context into their analyses in order to answer questions such as, what are the characteristics of Head Start centers located in urban core areas? Are Head Start services and classroom experiences similar across communities with different demographics? And are there associations between children's well-being and the level of neighborhood deprivation of the Head Start Center? Again, since the contextual variables are intended to enhance other FACES 2014 data files rather than being used on their own, your analysis should be driven by the data available in these other FACES 2014 study files about Head Start centers, classrooms, and children. For this reason, no analysis weights are included in the contextual variables data file. After the contextual variables are merged with another FACES 2014 study file, the applicable weight variables can be found in that file. For guidance on choosing the best weight to use, please refer to the main FACES 2014 user's manual. I'll now turn the webinar over to John Chaika, who will discuss the disclosure risk analysis we conducted for this data file.
Thank you, Andrew. The participants in the FACES study were promised that their identities will remain confidential, and measures that were taken to protect the confidentiality of these participants include not revealing the names or the locations of the FACES centers with which the study participants are associated. Andrew mentioned that earlier. Adding contextual variables to the FACES data creates a risk that center locations may become identifiable. I will explain how this risk arises, how we sought to measure the risk, and what we did to reduce the risk. There are a number of protections that derive directly from the use of the virtual data enclave as the means to access these data. Researchers who wish to use the FACES contextual variables must sign a data use agreement, which includes provisions that the users may not attempt to re-identify FACES centers. The agreement specifies pretty severe penalties for violating its terms. In addition, there are certain features of the virtual data enclave that reinforce the prohibitions in the data use agreement. One, the remote users will be physically unable to print or download data from the VDE. The VDE software simply does not allow these operations. In addition, all analytical results that users wish to remove from the VDE, such as tables, must conform to specified restrictions and be vetted by staff at ICPSR, who will, at the end, email the approved materials to the users. Restrictions include, for example, specifications of minimum cell sizes and tabulations, minimum subgroup sizes for estimates of regression equations. These restrictions are highly effective in limiting disclosure risk, but as I will discuss next, Mathematica performs some additional steps to further reduce the risk that individual FACES centers could be re-identified. Now, how exactly does the addition of contextual variables contribute to disclosure risk? First of all of the contextual variables are drawn from public sources. We did not have any special access that allowed us to obtain these variables that we added to the contextual variables data set. So by searching these public sources, a user might be able to determine that the contextual variables assigned to a particular FACES Head Start center correspond to a unique census tract. That is, there might be only one census tract in the entire United States that includes this combination of characteristics. And if this census tract contained only one Head Start center, then knowing the census tract would effectively identify the FACES Head Start center. Now, how can we assess the disclosure risk that the contextual variables pose, and how can we work on reducing that risk? First, we note that disclosure risk tends to increase with the number of contextual variables. In particular, the number of contextual variables that are needed to uniquely identify a census tract depends on, one, the level of detail included in each variable. For example, a variable with 100 categories is much more disclosive of location than a variable with only 3 categories. In addition, correlations among the variables, which directly affect how much new information each variable adds. For example, if 2 variables are perfectly correlated, the second variable adds no additional information. On the other hand, if 2 variables are poorly correlated, the extra variables add quite a bit of additional information. So the lower the correlation among variables, the fewer variables are needed to uniquely identify a location. In Mathematica's disclosure risk analysis, we focused on determining the number of contextual variables that were required to uniquely identify a tract, conditional on the level of detail in each variable. So by reducing the level of detail in each variable, that is, by reducing the number of categories and making the categories more uniform in size, we can increase the number of variables needed to uniquely identify a census tract. And this would serve two purposes. One, it would allow us to include more contextual variables. And two, given the physical limitations imposed by the virtual data enclave, it would make it more difficult for a user with nefarious purposes to pull together enough information to begin to re-identify faces centers. Remember that through the virtual data enclave, it is not possible for a user to physically download or print any data. There is no prevention, however, from a user using a pencil and paper to copy down information, although that would violate the terms of the disclosure data use agreement. Mathematica's analysis of disclosure risk focused on determining how often a particular combination of contextual variables uniquely identifies the census tract in which a FACES Head Start Center is located. So here's some basic math underlying our disclosure analysis. There are 399 FACES centers in the 2014 data file, and these are located in 390 different census tracts. Thus, some tracts have more than one FACES center. The remaining 72,666 tracts have no FACES centers. So the disclosure risk for a FACES center is reduced when multiple tracts without FACES centers share the same combination of contextual variables as the tract within which a FACES center is located. So when multiple tracts share the same characteristics as a FACES center, it is not clear to a user which of these tracts includes the location of the FACES center. Now, recall what I said about the risk posed by the level of detail contained in the contextual variables. The Social Deprivation Index and the Child Opportunity Index pose the greatest risk because they are easily downloaded, they're defined at the tract level, they have 100 values, and they require no additional processing by the user. The downloaded data provide a social deprivation index or a child opportunity index value for every census tract in the US. So with these data, a user could sort the tracts by combinations of these two indices and determine what census tracts have the same combination of values as a particular FACES center. Even with these detailed indices, there will be multiple tracts with the same combination of values, probably more than 10 on average. By contrast, to use the American Community Survey variables, for which we include 24 for re-identification, a user would have to work through several steps. First, the user would have to determine exactly which variables we use to construct our contextual variables. And I note that most of the ACS contextual variables are based on percentages, which means we had to construct them by dividing one ACS variable by another ACS variable. Next, the user would have to download the component variables at the tract level. The user would then have to replicate how we constructed the contextual variables, and then would have to replicate our recoding, which we describe below. To reduce the disclosure risk, then, we employed several steps. First, we found from our analysis that with no recoding, nearly all FACES center tracts are uniquely identified by the combination of the SDI, the COI, and 3 component COI indices and the RUCA code. That is, for most of the FACES centers, there was only one census tract with the same combination of these 6 variables. Now, simply by eliminating the 3 component indices of the COI, and coarsening both the SDI and the COI to 50 categories instead of 100, we reduced the number of unique combinations among the faces centers to near zero. Adding the ACS variables, of course, increases the disclosure risk, but by substantially collapsing each ACS variable, we could greatly reduce the disclosure risk that these additional variables create. As a result, any attempt by a user to re-identify a center would not only violate the terms of the data use agreement, it would require a very substantial effort on the user's part. Based on the findings from the disclosure risk analysis, Mathematica recoded all of the contextual variables as described here. So the 3 index variables, which also include the ADI, and were originally scored from 1 to 100, were collapsed to 50 total codes. The 10 category rural-urban commuting area code was collapsed into 4 codes. And the 24 demographic and socioeconomic ACS variables were collapsed into either 3 or 4 codes. Now, the user would, of course, prefer to have the full detail for every variable, but providing such detail would have been equivalent to providing the information needed to re-identify nearly every faces center. And while the data use agreement specifically prohibits attempts at re-identification, the obligation to protect the confidentiality of the faces participants required these additional actions. Now, I'll say a little bit more about the data user resources that are available. The FACES 2014 Contextual Variables Data File Users Manual will be the primary resource for information about how to use this data file. It includes a codebook and guidelines for using the data. As a reminder, unlike other FACES 2014 data files, this data file can only be accessed through CF Data's virtual data enclave. It also has restrictions, as we mentioned, on the kinds of outputs that users can produce with the data, including minimum cell size requirements or a maximum number of contextual variables used in an analysis. All of these restrictions are described in the user's manual. In addition to the FACES Contextual Variables User's Manual, users are also encouraged to become familiar with the user's manuals of the other FACES 2014 data files that they will be merging the contextual variables onto. And these include the FACES 2014 User's Manual, the FACES 2014 Family Engagement Plus Study User's Manual. These other manuals can be found on their study homepages on the Child and Family Data Archive. And I will now pass things on to Vrinda, who will present on the CF Data Archive, as well as how to apply for access to the contextual variables data file.
Thank you, John. As John mentioned, I'm going to give a brief overview of the Child and Family Data Archive now. Launched in 2019, CF Data preserves and disseminates data on topics related to young children, their families and communities, and the programs that serve them. The FACES series data is one of the hundreds of data sets archived at CF Data, along with their accompanying documentation available for secondary data analysis. And all of these data are available to researchers to analyze free of charge. CF Data has a range of data, including on federal and state-funded programs, such as Head Start, the Child Care and Development Fund Block Grant, and the Maternal, Infant, and Early Childhood Home Visiting Program. We also have administrative data, community-based surveys, focused on parent and child development, and observational studies in classrooms and homes. The CF Data website is available at childandfamilydataarchive.org. Through the website, users can explore data, learn more about childcare and early education research, and discover the training opportunities presented by us. The first tab on the website, circled here in red, is called Getting Started, and it provides a great overview for new users of some of the highlights of the website with quick links to various resources that might be helpful to you. Under the Data tab, users can search and browse the entire CF Data catalog. And there are filters there, including by release date that you can use to find recently released or updated data files, or by subject terms if you're not quite sure what you're looking for or where to start. There's also a helpful how to access data page that can help you learn more about the access methods, including the VDE as John described, and application process. Other data-related tabs include the Variables tab and Publications tab. Variables allows users to search for variables across all studies housed at CF Data, and then you can find which study might include a variable that you are looking for. And the Publications tab searches through publications that have cited data archived at CF Data and then provides a link to that cited study. Under the About Us tab, users can learn more about CF Data, our project team, and about announcements, data releases, and upcoming trainings through the news link here. We also have a collection of video resources on our website, which you can find under the Resources tab. Here you will find many videos of data release webinars and their accompanying slides, as well as past data trainings that were offered by data producers. You can filter the videos by a particular data set here, and a video recording of today's webinar will be added to this page when it's available. So this was just a brief overview of CF Data, but to learn more about the archive, we encourage you to visit us at our website, and under the About Us tab, you can find this fun short 2-minute video that introduces you to the collection and to the resources that we provide. So now let's turn to how you can access the Contextual Variables data file for FACES 2014. To find the study, enter the study title or acronym in the search box highlighted here by the red oval, and hit return or click on the magnifying glass, and that will take you to the search results page. So here we have an example using the FACES 2019 study, where you can see that that is the first study that appears on the list. And when you click on the name of the study, that will take you to the study homepage. So this is a screenshot of an example study homepage for FACES 2019. Once the Contextual Variables data file is released later this fall, there will be a similar study page available for that data. So just to note that the Contextual Variables data file page will be a separate study page from the other FACES 2014 studies that Andrew had mentioned. So the main FACES 2014 study page and the FACES Family Engagement Plus study are all on different home pages. So the home page is where you will find important information, such as a summary about the study and information on the study's methodology, sampling, weights, and more. And you can view publications based on use of the Contextual Variables data file here. While users may preview and download the public documentation here under the Data and Documentation tab, a restricted data application is required for users to gain access to the data due to the sensitive nature. So once you've explored the documentation and decided that you'd like to use this data for your research, you can begin your application by clicking on the Access Restricted Data button, which will take you to the application page for the ICPSR Virtual Data Enclave System, or VDE. So the VDE allows users to access the data from a remote, secure desktop and collaborate with other researchers on your team within that virtual workspace. It has useful data software programs available there for you to use, such as SAS, SPSS, R, etc., and Microsoft Suite programs such as Excel and Word. So, as we mentioned earlier, you would be applying for each of the different FACES studies separately, but the FACES 2014 data set will be included in your data package in the VDE to allow you to link this data file with that data set as appropriate. The application requires several pieces of information, including a description of the intended research project and why you need the data, a list of research staff, an IRB determination letter, and a signed restricted data use agreement from your institution or organization. For the VDE, users are also required to watch a brief security training video and complete a quiz prior to approval. Archive staff are available to assist you with your application and to answer any questions that you might have along the way. You can just email us at cfdata-help@umich.edu with your application request number and question. So now we are happy to take a few questions. Feel free to type your question into the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand, and if you'd like to ask a question out loud, and we can unmute your mic. I do see that a few questions have already been coming in, so we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first question we see is, can we use the FACES 2014 contextual variables data file without merging to another FACES 2014 data file?
Sure, I can take that one. The answer is no. The FACES 2014 contextual variables data file is designed to be merged to another main FACES 2014 study file. And importantly, the analysis weights that you would like to use is in the other data file. So it would have to be merged to access those analysis weights.
Okay. Are you concerned that recoding the ACS variables to just 3 or 4 values will greatly limit their analytic utility?
I'll respond to this. There's a trade-off, as you may know, between data utility and confidentiality protection. And you can't have a data set that allows complete utility without having a very high risk of disclosure. And so this trade-off is one that's difficult to navigate. Our decision here was that by reducing the detail on the ACS variables, we could include a lot more of them. And so that's our way of increasing analytical utility within this environment. It may remain to users to determine how well they can work with these particular restrictions. We don't have particular plans to change anything about the way the variables are created, but that kind of input would be useful. And I would add as well that even though we've reduced the 2 indices from 100 to 50 categories, that's still a lot of detail. And those are major resource variables. And we're hoping that people will focus very heavily on those where we have lost very little analytic utility with our measures.
Okay. Have you all conducted any analyses comparing the variability displayed in the contextual variables before and after coarsening? For example, if is it possible for users to know the variance of a contextual variable before and after coarsening?
Yes, it would be possible by separately constructing those variables with the ACS data. You'd have to, download them. You can do that on your own computer and estimate the variability. As I said, we've reduced most of those percentage variables down to 3 categories. So you're going to have substantially less variability than you would with the original variables. But you can, make an assessment of what kind of a difference it'll make.
Okay. Okay, I can take this next couple of questions. There's a question about, do we have to apply for FACES 2014 and FACES 2014 contextual variables separately? So if you apply for the FACES 2014 contextual variables data file, you will also receive the FACES 2014 main data set in your data package within the VDE, since they are designed to be used together. If you already have access to FACES 2014, then you will need to and want to now have access to the contextual variables data file, you will have to submit a separate application now for the contextual variables data file. And then you would be accessing both the FACES 2014 and the contextual variables within the VDE. If you have specific questions about the access, you can always reach out to us about your specific situation, and we can work to answer that for you. I see a question about what's the timing on releasing the most recent baby faces data set. We don't have a specific time frame for baby faces, but we believe that it will be released later this fall, along with the FACES 2014 contextual data file. Can we download a codebook for the data before applying for access? Yes. The codebook and public documentation will be available for download prior to applying for. And we encourage people to explore that documentation before you decide to apply to make sure that it will fit your research needs. What kind of restrictions are imposed on the analytical results that users wish to remove from the VDE?
I can respond to that. There's a description of the vetting procedures that's available through the website, but one of the more notable restrictions is that users will be limited to downloading weighted estimates. In other words, raw frequency counts are not something that can be removed from the VDE for this particular data set. We do note, however, that the codebook includes univariate statistics for each of the variables, and so you'll be able to get some sense of frequency counts from that. Other types of restrictions involve how many contextual variables one can cross-tabulate in the data set that's being released. Now, I should add that users of the VDE don't have restrictions on what they can actually do in their analyses. It's what they're wishing to remove from the VDE for which the vetting instructions imply. And so you can determine from an extensive analysis what's the most useful, most informative set of materials to remove. And then that's what you can submit for the review by the ICPSR committee.
Okay. Okay. Another question, this is a follow-up to the question about the coarsening. Just to clarify, the variability question related to the variability within the merged contextual data set, for example, merged with the center level data set. It would be helpful for users to know the variance of a contextual variable within its full range of values before coarsening and the variance with the limited range of values after.
Right, well, that's something we have probably done, but we haven't put together. We would have to look at whether it's possible to produce estimates like that. But I'd again underscore that there's going to be a very substantial reduction in variability when you go from individual percentages that can be calculated out to any decimal place down to 3 categories. So in the end, I'm not sure how helpful that would be to a user.
There was one other question that had come in earlier that my colleague Tessa answered, but I just wanted to reiterate. Somebody asked if they can access the slides after the webinar, and the answer is yes. The webinar slides will be on the Child and Family Data Archive website on the video resources page, and we will be sending an email notification to all people who registered for today's webinar when they are uploaded onto the website and available. I don't see any other questions at the moment. But if you think of something after, please feel free to email CFData at cfdata-help@umich.edu with your questions. And if you have specific questions related to the FACES study, there is a FACES help email as well that Tessa has put into the chat. It is faces-AIAN faces-help at mathematica-mpr.com. And then lastly, I would just like to remind, oh, I see another question came through. Are there contextual variables available for AIAN faces?
No, I don't know that we considered that, but there's nothing available at present.
I just want to give a quick reminder to everybody to please visit the CF Data website to request access to these data, which will be available within the next month or so. You can also sign up for our listserv to receive notifications on data release announcements, data webinars, and workshops, as well as our quarterly newsletter. We'll send out that notification to everyone when the webinar is up and when the data are released. And in the meantime, you are welcome to contact us with any questions or if you need any assistance. So I just, oh, I see another response real quick. Said it would probably be helpful for folks to know the % reduction in variance before and after coarsening if you can provide it in the contextual data documentation. So otherwise I want to just thank everyone. Oh, I see an attendee who has raised their hand. I think they've put their hand down, but yes, just feel free, please, to email us if you think of a question afterwards. In the meantime, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I want to thank John and Andrew for sharing all of this great information. Thank you.